Alright, now Malaysians would be familiar with this company called TM. It stands for Telekom Malaysia, I suppose, right? And it's been changed from Telekom Malaysia. Previously, it was named Telekom Malaysia. Now the name is TM, and they provide several services to access the internet. For example, you might have heard of Streamix, and you might have heard of Unify, for example. Now, when you subscribe to a certain service, you know that you pay a certain amount of money, and with that amount of money, you will get a certain service, right? Generally speaking, the more money you pay, the better the services you get. And what am I talking about, right? I'm talking about what? Can you think of any experiences that you have, right? I'm talking about, for example, speed. I'm talking about how much data capacity or um, data limit. Right? I think needless to say, you will pay a certain amount of fee so that, for example, you will get 5 gigs of data, 10 gigs of data, and whatnot. You're also paying a certain amount of money, so you get 10 megabits per second or 20 megabits per second, right? So these are all controlled by your service provider, right? So in using um, a certain service in order to get a certain communication channel so that we can send data from point A to point B, where point A and point B is supposedly further away from each other. Let's say point A is in Malaysia, point B is somewhere in California, for example, right, where certain servers are located. Now, when or if you do this, you will use some kind of communications channel. If you remember, we talked about coaxial cable and fiber optics and lots of different kinds of cables, right? So basically speaking, from your computer, which is digital data, you will send your data, you will change a signal into a different form or different format, right? In order for you to send using a cable provided by TM, using a communications channel provided by TM, right? So you will need to translate this digital data into some kind of other forms of data. For example, analog data, right? So you might want to read about analog and digital inside your slides. These are two different types of data. One is discrete and stepped, meaning it's definite. You see, discrete means definite. It's either 1 or 0, 1 or 0. The other is continuous. This is called analog data. Right? Continuous, meaning it is not stepped. It is not definite 1 or 0. You actually have 1, 0.9999999, 0.9999998, 0.9999 up until you get 0, for example. That is always the value wherever you point in the analog graph. Whereas if you point to a digital graph, you will see either 1 or 0, right? It's stepped and it's definite. Now, to be able to use mostly analog communications channel, or any kinds of communications channel, you will need to translate your signal from digital into something else, in this case analog, right? And to be able to do that, you use what we call a modem. The word modem is actually a combination of two words. The first one being modulation, the second one being demodulation, right? And again, this is something that you have in your slides, but we'll just review about it here. Modulation means you change your digital signal into analog signal. Right? Let's call this point A1. A1, right? So point A1 is where you change it into analog signal, right? And then point B1 is where you change it back to digital signal, where it gets to the next computer. The next computer is a big computer, it's called a server, for example, right? But we'll get to that later. We'll focus on this first, A1 and B1. the process happening at A1 is called modulation. It's where you change from digital to analog. At point B1, on the other hand, is the process we call demodulation. It's where you change from analog to digital, right? So we combine these two words, modulation, demodulation, and so we have a device called the modem, right? So it's a device that translates signals, right, from one type of signal, for example digital, to analog, or analog to digital. Now, if you think about it, by having a modem, companies like TM and Maxis and and P1 and Yes, they will actually have a control over how you use these services, right? So modem, aside from modulation, demodulation, it is also a measure of control, right? So now we talk about your usage of their services. When or if you want to use the services of any service companies, they will quote you such things such as you can use it for a certain amount of money, right? And you will get a certain speed, right? And a certain amount of data, right? So the speed at which data will get to your computer, or vice versa, data from your computer will get to another computer using their communication channel, is what we'll call the bandwidth. Right? I say speed of data. In reality, we're talking about how wide is the road, how wide is the pathway, in such a way that how much data can actually get in, right? So in a way, it's also a measure of total data. In any 1 second, how much data can actually arrive at your computer? How wide is the road, right? So we're talking about data speed, but we call it bandwidth because if the band is wider, more data can get there in the same amount of time, right? Now, bandwidth is the theoretical maximum which is quoted by your service provider, right? Your service provider will say, you pay this amount of money, let's say 50 ringgit per month, you will get a bandwidth of how many gigabits per second, right? Meaning to say that you will get how speedy is your data, right? So that is a theoretical maximum, meaning to say that they are looking at the best case scenario, right? In reality, when you use your internet for real, what happens is that you will get only a certain amount of your quota or bandwidth, and this is called a throughput. A throughput is the real amount of data that can actually get to your computer or from your computer to an outside computer at any one given time, right? So it's a real value, real amount of data, right? And when or if your service company is charging you a lot, right, it is usually because you might be using what we call broadband. Broadband means the width of your cable is so large, right, so great that you can actually have lots of different data coming in. You can have video and audio and other data coming in all at once, meaning it's like you're having a highway of lots of lanes, so lots of data can actually get to your computer and from your computer to an outside computer at any given time. So it's like broadband, it's like a wide highway, right? And when you're using broadband, that means a lot of data from different types of data can actually get to your computer at any given time, right? And so that is service, and that is usage of modem, and that is bandwidth and throughput and broadband. And please do also remember about digital and analog and a service provider.